I'm pleased and honored to address you, and I've been coming to, I'm older than you think. I'm almost 70. I dye my hair so I don't look so old. I've been coming to Sweden for a long, long time. I was at one time close to some of you, Bentova and Anne-Marie Janssen, wonderful, wonderful people. And I used to be an ecologist, you know, and I still am. I think I'm an ecologist more than most ecologists, but I work often on oil and economics. Let's see, is this the thing I need to use? How'd you do this?
I did it on computer. Okay, fine, great.
So, I got the idea about what I'm going to talk about, which is called EROI, Energy Return on Investment, when I was a graduate student working with Howard Odom at the University of North Carolina. And I measured migrating fish, and I looked at how much energy the fish would use to get from here to there. And I would measure the productivity of the different systems using something called the diurnal oxygen method. And I did this for 3 years and calculated that for every calorie the fish would invest in migration, they or their progeny would get back at least 4. And I looked at this as energy return on investment. And I would sit on this rock. This is where the concept came from at night. And I was out there a lot. I love doing my PhD work. And thinking about fish is where what we're going to talk about comes from. And it's very simple. I'm going to tell you some very simple things. And maybe I'm too simple in this lecture I'm going to do today, but I want for people to understand that a lot of the most important things you need to know are really simple. But we don't teach them. You can teach them to somebody in the 3rd grade easily. So energy return on investment is the energy delivered to society over the energy that you use to get it, just like the fish. And it's usually considered, it's usually considered energy invested from society. Tar sands is a bit of a special case because they're taking some of the resources and using it there. And we can talk about that independently. And there's a best first principle. This is Ricardo's basic idea. Ricardo is an economist I do admire greatly. And most of them I don't. And he says that humans go after the best stuff first, the best land. That's what he was particularly interested in, and so forth and so on. So this is really important. So here's all I'm talking about. Here's how we used to get oil. The first oil well was actually in Ontario, not Pennsylvania, but we like to think, you know, the Americans like to think they're first. And so here's Drake's well, and this is not too much investment, and it's mostly from human labor. And there's Spindletop. That changed the world and turned us into oil, an oil-using nation and economy and world and whatever else. And people found out that you could get an amazing amount of oil from a trivial investment. That's where our wealth came from. Where does our wealth come from? It comes from the fact that we can get energy cheaply and use it to do all kinds of things that we used to do by hand. I recommend to all of you that you read this on page 8 of the EROI handout, some information I got from the old Swedish forester, a good friend of mine, Ulf Sundberg, his analysis of the energy return on investment for Swedish charcoal makers in the old days. It's fantastic. And please read, if you're interested, his whole paper is much better than my little excerpt. Well, you know, this is a rather different energy investment. This is Thunder Horse. This is our best well at the moment in the U.S. And, you know, part of the energy investment is taking care of this stuff too. But this is made in Louisiana, and the nearest iron that I can figure to Louisiana is in Minnesota. Where all American Swedes are. So they mine the iron there and take it out in the Gulf of Mexico. And there's 6,000 of these bloody things, not all this big. out in the Gulf of Mexico to get about 20% of our oil. It's been going on for a long time. This is the size of oil fields. It takes about the same amount of energy to drill a hole in the ground, but we used to get a lot more when we made that drilling. A particularly good analysis was done by Lena Grandel, who is a student of Shell here in Uppsala. And I met her for the first time, but we have been working together for a long time. But I met her yesterday for the first time. And this is production in Norway. Shell showed you the same graph, more or less. And here's the oil, and this is the gas. And all of these are metric tons oil equivalent, and condensate and natural gas liquid. So this is all the energy you get out. And this is the energy that you use, the direct energy and the energy that is required to make all of the rigs and so forth. Most of the energy in an oil field is used to push the oil through the substrate, because oil in the ground is not like oil that you pour in your motor. It's like an oil-soaked brick, and you have to push the oil through it, and that takes a lot of energy because it's sticky. And so here's energy return on investment for Norwegian oil alone. That Leanna, and a little help from me and Michael Hook calculated, and this is for the oil and the gas together. Norway is a good place to do this because they keep good statistics. And one of the big problems we're facing, especially in the United States, is that we're not maintaining as good data on how we use energy in our society, but that's a different question. Now, the energy return on investment for the United States, going back to 1919, is more complex. And it increased. This is pretty good data, by the way. The U.S., well, it appears to be good. I mean, it's assuming that the federal officials do a good job. And it increased regularly. And this is what you would expect. This is technical improvements and all, because the oil companies are technically, of course, quite magnificent in all the things they do. But then there was this tremendous dip and then a recovery, and then it's gone way down again. And we don't have the more recent data, but we think it's probably continuing to go down. And this is the rate of exploitation, as an index is the amount of drilling we do. And so we found this again and again all around the world, that when you drill hard, you're just like fishing. When I got this idea with Cutler Cleveland, because I just given a lecture on fisheries, and we were looking at the data, an update of the Hubbard data, and it was the most exciting moment in science I ever had, was to find out, I said, Cutler, it's just like for fish. The harder you fish for oil, the lower your efficiency is. So, you know, in the American political scene, people say, drill, baby, drill, and all that kind of stuff. But there's no way that this, when you drill a lot, you drill stupidly. And that's a problem we face. So when we drill a lot, you see the energy return on investment goes down, and then we drill a little bit, and it goes way up, and then we start drilling a lot more, and there's a general trend, a secular trend here, that's also influenced by the drilling effort. And so here are some statistics. Here are 3 studies for EROI for the United States. One could draw a line, something like that if you wish. I mean, what happens when it hits the bottom? I don't know. And this is for Norway. Norway's a good high energy return on investment country. We've done it now for China. China's way down there. And this is for all publicly traded companies, so it's sort of a global average. So they're all dropping. And we can't find anything that's not dropping except coal, maybe. Is shale oil production in the USA? Oh, this is Shell's slide. We didn't just look at the first part. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, we have these oil and gas new stuff with the new technology of horizontal drilling and fracking. And if we look at the Bakken, which is part of the Williston here, I couldn't get a slide quickly of the Bakken, but it's something like this. And, you know, they're eternally optimists in the United States, and they say, whoa, all this new technology, we're going to be exporting oil. And our president says this morning, oh, thank God we got Obama, thank God. The president this morning, even just for oil, even just for energy, let alone everything else. It's not that he gets it, but he's so much closer than anybody else. So anyway, we have these Williston Basin and the Eagle Ford down here in Texas, and lots of gas coming out of. This was the big one, Barnett. That was our future in gas, but that's already peaked. And well, in Haynesville, Haynesville's over here somewhere, here it is, Haynesville. Well, that's peaked also. So they keep coming on. This is for gas. Now they're talking about Marcellus, and I live right about there, and the town of Marcellus is about, the wiggle of my wrist away here. So let's take a look at this. And I want to show you what you can do yourself to examine the issue of peak oil, okay? So here's this is the wonderful now technology, and they go down, and it is marvelous, it's incredible. And they go down, and then they bend their pipe sideways, and they can go, see, 2 miles is how many kilometers? 4 or 5 kilometers out, which in a way is good environmentally because you don't make as many wells, perhaps. But what people don't quite understand is you have to have between 300 and 1,000 giant trucks worth of stuff to do one of these wells. And they're taking the water out of our trout streams at night, and then the next night dumping them back in. So we're not doing that too much anymore, but they were doing some of that, And what's true for these, for a good regular well, you get production that goes on for many years. But in these new fracking means fracturing the rocks with rock pressure. When they first started it, they would take 8 fire engines and put them up one after another in series to increase the pressure and push that stuff down into the rocks. And the wells drop off very fast. So you get a little dribble for a long time. And, excuse me, so let's take a look at the most exciting. This is what's going to save us all. The whole world is going to be saved from the Bakken. Remember, that's up in Montana and North Dakota, and it's almost as big as one of those big states. It goes up into Canada. So let's look at the Bakken. So this is 2000, and this is an important place here, Elm Coulee in Montana. This is Montana, and I'm retiring and moving over to this part of Montana. So it's either the good news, I'm going to have a little oil, or the bad news comes with it. And here's Billings Nose, but Nesson, and then over here we have Parsol. Well, you'll see what happens here. 2000. Now, the green is oil, and the yellow is gas, and the red is some mixture. But just look at the green. So, well, this was all the excitement, you see? And whoa. So there are all these wells that deliver at least 500 barrels a day. You make a lot of money. And then they start applying this horizontal stuff over here in North Dakota. And this is Parsol, which is misspelled here. Parsol here. Here's the area we're looking at. But you should look, there's oil wells peppered around other places, but they don't get much oil. So I thought about this, and so we're driving from Syracuse out to our new house in Montana last summer, and this is what you can do. I hope you can understand that the ideas we're trying to say are very simple and very straightforward. So here's a car window view of peak oil. Oh, here's Montana. You see, the first one is already peaked. We got some more in West Virginia. North Dakota is increasing very rapidly, but Montana is peaked and it's going down. So here we are. We're coming to the town of Parsall. I'm very excited, you see. So my wife is driving so I don't make any mistakes. And that's what it looks like. Well, it's a nice fields of grass and antelope and a couple of pheasants. And then 3 miles west of the town of Parsall, do you want to make this darker? Is it okay? Do you need it darker? It's okay? Okay. And then you get into all this oil stuff. Oh, this is terrible. Can you turn there's a dimmer behind you in the white shirt. Can you turn this down? Does that work? Whoa, well, it doesn't. This one we got to kill. I don't know if that's possible. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. They're beautiful pictures, but they don't show up too well here. So you'll get into a place called New City. And the place is booming. Thousands and thousands and thousands of oil workers there. And all kinds of little industries that are growing up around oil. And this is where the workers live because there's no place for them to live. And so if you want a job in the U.S., you go here and they'll hire you, whatever skills you have, they'll hire you. And in the middle of town, it's just nothing but these big trucks carrying God knows what kind of stuff around, but some of it's oil probably. And that's what it looks like for 20 miles. It's a sweet spot. And then that's what it looks like. I'm in the Bakken field now. I'm right in the middle of the Bakken field, and that's what it looks like. So you have to understand that what's going on now is all about sweet spots. You saw the density of the wells in the sweet spots, and what we don't know is how many additional sweet spots there are. Maybe none. Now, when I want to talk about oil price and economics, I've done some work with Kerry King of the University of Texas. And when the energy return on investment goes down, the price goes up. And we find that we think that Mother Nature bats last, but she's batting right now. And the energy return on investment is determining the price of oil. Other things as well. And the energy return on investment is declining, the price of oil is going up, so does minerals go up, both in the 70s and now. And so for importers, I don't know what that is, this is an important graph. This doesn't show up very well. We just merged our email, our PowerPoints, and I apologize for this. It doesn't show up very well. But anyway, this is Saudi Arabia. This is our big savior. Now, I'm talking about Sweden now. And so this is going up to 2020 here, 2030. And the use by Sweden, and we had published on this about 10 years ago, the oil use by all of the producing countries is increasing enormously. And the amount left for export will be whatever they're producing minus what they use internally. And this is the 16 largest oil producers. And this is what their net export is modeled by my student Han Yu and your student Wang. This is what's going to be available for Sweden. Same thing Shell showed you, except for what China and India get. And China's got all of our dollars, so I don't know where your crowns are. this will be a problem. So what are the economic implications? Well, if you big in the U.S. elections and big in what's going on in at least the rest of Europe is there's no growth. And somehow we're supposed to be shamed because we're not managing our economies right. But if you look at the growth of GDP in the U.S., and we could do this for lots of other places, certainly Japan and European Union, but this is the U.S., and it kind of goes down every decade. And this is what the growth in the rate of oil production is. And Shell was talking about over here, where it's more or less flat. I think there's a correlation. I will talk tomorrow about, Shell said I couldn't say bad things about economists at this public lecture, so I won't. But tomorrow I'll say some bad things about economists, okay? And about whether or not you want to build economics as a social science or a biophysical science. And a very interesting thing I think about energy return on investment is this. If you take 100 megajoules of oil out of the ground and then you try to drive a truck with it, and so you have to get it out of the ground, refine it, and transport it to where you're going to use it, and then use a lot of it to build the infrastructure to build to have a truck, to run a truck. And when you're all done discounting some of these products that are non-oil products from the refinery, it takes about an energy return on investment of 3 to 1 to give you a barrel of oil. You don't got to take 3 barrels out of the ground to be able to use a barrel to drive a truck. And so we took this concept with Jessica Lambert, and it's based on Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, what you have to do first. And so if let's say Sweden discovers some oil, but it's not very good oil field, and you get it with an EROI of 1.1 to 1. That would be like U.S. alcohol from corn. And if you did that, you could extract the energy, and you could take it out of the ground, and you could look at it. If you had 1.2 to 1, you could refine that energy and look at it. 1.3 to 1, you could take it to where you wanted to use it and look at it. If you had 3 to 1, you could drive a truck, because you'd have to have the depreciation of the trucks and the roads and all of that is part of what you're doing. But if you wanted to grow food and put it in the truck, you might need 5 to 1. Now, these numbers are pretty solid, and they get increasingly squishy as we get up here, but just to give you the idea. Now, we've included in here the depreciation of the truck and the roads and the bridges, but we also have to include the depreciation of the oil worker, the farmer, and the construction worker on the roads, etc. And so in order to deal with that depreciation, I'm understanding that depreciation as I approach 70, is that you've got to support the family. And to support the family, then you need maybe 7 or 8 to 1. And then if you want to educate the children, which I hope we do, you need 9 or 10 to 1. If you want to have health care, you need 12 to 1. If you want to have grand opera, the opera hall here, I love opera, and you need 14 perhaps to 1. So in the United States, 45 of our 50 states are broke. Many of our cities are broke. The pension plans are broke. The state universities are broke. Our symphony, a wonderful Syracuse Symphony, has disbanded. They're broke. I think we're moving down here. Well, we do solar, I suppose. So this is a solar collector. Here's a person standing here. This solar collector would use half the energy required for an American, maybe all the energy for a Swede. So it's pretty serious business. Now, I want to talk a little bit. I'm a systems scientist, a systems ecologist, and I want to talk a little bit about systems theory. You can have, this is equilibrium, or whether something is stable or not. And you can have a marble on top of a pencil and it's unstable. Any little breeze will knock it into a different regime. You can have a marble on a tabletop and you can poke it and it'll roll along and stop at some other place. It's called neutrally stable. The more interesting one is stable, that if you have a marble in your bowl and you push it up with your finger, it'll fall off your finger probably eventually and roll back to the same place. Now, the U.S. economy basically hasn't grown. I don't think it's grown at all because I think the government cooks the books, but that's another story on inflation. But if the U.S. economy keeps at about the same place. Now, it's the highest economy we've ever had, but it's not growing. Why can't we employ our people? Well, you know, then we get into questions of labor productivity and using energy to support labor to make them more productive, which puts laborers out of work, of course, right? It means you have to have more throughput of stuff per worker. That's an environmental issue. We could go on and on. But anyway, here we are. Let's look how this works in the U.S. economy. Every time the price of oil gets above around 5.5% of the total GDP, then we have a recession. And I have a better curve showing this more often. But anyway, each time the oil gets up to 5.5%, we have a recession, or if energy overall gets above about 10% of GDP, we have a recession. And, well, here's what we do. If you see in the world, if we're not using much oil, we use the low energy return on investment, the cheap stuff. But as you use more and more oil, you have to use more expensive oil. So, I mean, businesses are no fools. If the economy is slow, you only go buy the cheapest oil available. But when the economy is expanding, you're using more oil, and then you go and you have to buy more expensive oil. And when you do that, it pushes it above this 5.5%, and your economy goes into recession. And so what's happening is the economy expands, it gets up here, but it has to start using more expensive oil. So the marble falls off your finger and comes back to the same place. Or maybe it rolls up here a little bit, and then you can start using cheaper oil, and the economy will grow again. I think this is from my former doctoral student, David Murphy. I think this explains a lot of what's going on in at least the U.S. economy. And this is my last basic stuff here. This is we call the cheese slicer model. And this is the economy, and it produces GDP, which we call cheese. And it comes out here, and there's slicers here, you know, so as it comes out, it's 100% of the output of the economy here. It goes into either investments or consumption. This is just economic terms, and this is data from the U.S. So you have to invest in energy to get energy to run the economy. You stop that and the economy stops. You have to invest in infrastructure maintenance or your bridges fall into the Mississippi River, which we have had experience with. And then there's discretionary investment. So that's making a new hotel in a resort area or something. And then we have consumption, and that means using it now, and that goes to staples, basic food, shelter, and clothing for your people. And then we have discretionary, and so that's going to the movies, or you coming to this meeting, I suppose, or whatever you're going to do. Take a vacation, buy my book, I hope, you know, whatever. That's discretionary. You don't have to do it. That's now 1970. Look at the blue and the red. And now we have the oil crisis, and the blue gets more, and the red gets a lot less, huh? Well, curiously, this red doesn't, but I think this is kind of interesting. Then we go in the future, price of oil comes down, the amount that comes out of the, that goes into getting energy decreases, and then it starts to tweak up a little bit in 2007, and we project this into the future, and this gets a lot bigger, so the energy return on the investment, as that declines, which we suppose it will, in the U.S. In 2050, and that's what's left to go to the movies. So, is it this bleak? I don't know, but something like that is happening right now in the world. So, I have to say one bad thing about economics. So, most of our economic and financial theories were derived on this part of the Hubbard curve. And here's where we are now. If you hadn't noticed that the financial guys aren't doing quite so well now, and gals, certainly in the U.S., somebody said instead of putting these guys in Wall Street into prison, as Obama should have his first term, he hired them. And so let's see what he does the second term. Anyway, we have a big mess in the U.S. But what kind of economics are appropriate here? So you can have any kind of cockamamie economic theory, which is what we have. I wouldn't accept conventional economics from a freshman because it breaks the laws of thermodynamics, the boundaries are wrong, and it's not put forth as testable hypotheses, but as givens. It's no different from going to church. But anyway, what are we going to do here? So my main, what I'm trying to do with my book, I have one copy here, is to look into how we should teach economics. And that's what I'm really interested in. And it's hopeless to teach most conventional economists, although this, my friend Kent Klitgaard, is a very good economist. He's an economic historian. And so he understands the broad view of economics. So what we're interested in, and I'm interested in one thing in Sweden, and I have some people in Sweden interested in this, is even teaching, how do we teach economics in the high schools? And we started teaching our biophysical economics in the high schools of Syracuse, New York, and have 4 successful classes at that going now. So if any of you are or are connected to or know high school teachers that might be interested in this, we are setting up resources to do this kind of thing. So here's the conclusions of my talk, and shells too. Economic growth in the past has been highly dependent upon growth in fossil fuels. We cannot assume this growth will continue. I want to make it very clear, 2 things. One, we're scientists. We put forth our data. We're not sure we're right. We think we're right, but we might be wrong. That's okay. If we're wrong, you tell us, but you better have good data. And there's lots of oil, but there's not lots of cheap oil. And that's the mistake all kinds of people who are saying we have a rich oil future are missing, because we've used up the best stuff. Okay, the next one is, while technology is important in continuing, it appears that depletion is trumping technology, as indicated by declining production and energy return on investment. I gave this in England, but the UK is likely to depend increasingly on the EROI of imported fuels. That's true for Sweden. So how much energy does it cost to make a Volvo that you sell outside Sweden? How much oil does it take? And how much money do you get, and how many barrels of oil do you get for that amount of money? So that has to be done for Sweden. And our existing economic approaches and theories are completely inadequate for understanding these situations. I end with a concept from ecology, which is where I started. Remember, I'm an ecologist. And if you look at the development over time of a forest or for 100 years, or an aquarium for 100 days, or perhaps a city over time or a country, and you have, as time goes on, you start with an empty field called an old field, and your trees grow in, your bushes, and then your trees grow in, and your production goes up. The production, energy captured by the sun, goes up, and your biomass goes up, the amount of organic material, living organic material you have. But the biomass has a cost, and the cost is the energy to support it. We call it respiration, maintenance, metabolism, so forth in ecology. And as your infrastructure gets very large, your cost becomes very high. And that's also true for a city and a culture. And we're pretty interested in that. So I think I'm a systems scientist. I look at a city and I look at a forest and I look at a river or a lake, and to me it's all the same. They're all systems that are about producing and using energy and their relation over time and some other issues that are like that. So here we are. The picture's pretty bleak, gentlemen. The world's climates are changing. The mammals are taking over. And we all have a brain about the size of a walnut. Now it's our turn to say that. I don't know who's taking over, but... and my final professional goal is to push this rock off the cliff. And that's the end of our mutual talk.